The little girl didn't run. She burst into Simon Blackthorne's arms, shaking, bleeding, whispering one sentence that turned the Mafia king to stone. "He's coming, and he took Lucy." And when Simon spotted the smiling therapist stalking toward them, pretending innocence while Zoe clung to him like the last safe place on earth, everything inside him snapped. So he stormed out into the night, ready to confront the one predator even the Mafia feared, because what Zoe said next changed everything. Her scream cracked the air open. "Please, help me. He's coming." Everything stopped. Simon's men went silent, hands freezing mid-motion. They weren't used to children running toward them, especially not like this, like salvation depended on it. The girl's tiny feet slapped against the concrete, raw and bleeding, and before any of them could understand what was happening, she collided with Simon's chest. She clung to his leather vest with trembling fingers, burying her face against him like she believed he was the only safe place left in the world. For a moment, Simon didn't move. The weight of her shaking body, the smell of dust and panic on her skin, it hit him harder than any bullet. Something old and broken inside him stirred, something he had buried years ago when his little sister was taken and never found. Mateo glanced around, scanning the street. "Boss, this ain't normal." No, it wasn't. The girl's breathing was sharp, ragged, as though each inhale might be her last. Simon lowered a hand, resting it gently on her back, a strange gesture for a man whose touch usually brought fear, not comfort. Behind them, a car engine approached. Smooth, controlled, intentional. The girl stiffened so violently Simon felt it through his jacket. "He's coming," she whispered again, voice cracking. "Please don't let him take me." Her words weren't frantic. They were final, like she knew what would happen if she was caught. Across the lot entrance, a figure stepped into view. Clean cut, polished, tan polo shirt, khaki pants, shoes too clean for this part of town. He smiled warmly as if walking into a family gathering rather than a Mafia stronghold. "Zoe," he called gently. "Sweetheart, you gave me quite a scare. Let's go home now." Simon felt the girl, Zoe, tighten her grip until her nails bit through his shirt. She shook her head violently, eyes wide with a terror so pure it made even Rocco shift uneasily. Simon's voice came out low, dangerous. "That your kid?" The man clasped his hands together in practiced disappointment. "I'm her therapist. Zoe has emotional episodes. She wandered off while I was helping her. Thank you for catching her." Zoe's voice was a shredded whisper. "He's lying." Simon didn't look at her, but he felt the truth in her trembling. He'd lived long enough to recognize fear of the kind that doesn't come from imagination. "What time are you watching this?" Comment below. Mateo leaned in, muttering under his breath. "Boss, people need to see stuff like this. If anyone's watching, they should hit like just so this kid ain't forgotten." The polished man kept his patient smile. "There's nothing to be afraid of, Zoe. Remember what we talked about. Making up stories doesn't help anyone." Zoe shook harder, gripping Simon like a lifeline. "Don't let him take me. He took Lucy. He took her." That name meant nothing to Simon, but the despair behind it did. Dr. Adrian Cole's smile wavered for the first time. Simon stepped forward, shielding Zoe with his body. "You got ID, Doctor?" Cole hesitated. Only for a second, but a second was all Simon needed. Monsters could wear silk smiles. He'd seen it too many times. Zoe tugged weakly at Simon's vest. My mom's number. Please call her. Not him. Mateo didn't wait for permission. He pulled his phone, stepped aside, and dialed. Cole laughed lightly. This is unnecessary. Zoe is confused. Her mother trusts me completely. Then Mateo returned, face pale. Boss, the school filed a missing child report today. His voice dropped. She never made it to class. A cold wind cut through the lot. And the doctor here, Mateo continued, glaring at Cole, told them he would personally look for her. Cole's mask finally cracked. Simon felt Zoe's fingers tighten, as if bracing for her fate. The Mafia king fixed his eyes on the man pretending to be gentle, pretending to be trustworthy. A muscle in Simon's jaw pulsed. Zoe pressed her forehead to his chest and whispered one last time, broken and small. Please, don't let him take me back. Simon's hand rose, settling on the back of her head, not as a criminal, not as a king, but as someone who knew exactly what monsters looked like when they smiled. The night shifted, and Simon Blackthorne, Vassallo, stormed into the darkness, ready to tear down everything standing between this child and the truth she carried. Everything Zoe had been running from, everything waiting to be uncovered, was just beginning to surface. The past Simon tried to bury was about to collide with the nightmare Zoe had escaped, dragging them both into a war neither asked for. But one Simon would finish. Because a child had chosen the devil she didn't fear, to run from the one she did. The air in the waiting room felt too sterile, too quiet. Simon's gaze swept over the muted cream walls, the rigid metal chairs, the faint hum of the air conditioner. Nothing about this room suggested danger, yet instinct screamed otherwise. A man entered. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his shirt crisp and his tie perfectly knotted. His shoes clicked against the floor with the precision of a metronome. There was an odd calmness in his movements, a careful calculation in the way he held himself. "Mr. Anders," the man said, his voice smooth, measured. "Dr. Cole, I've been expecting you." Simon stood, every muscle tensing. The man extended his hand in greeting. His handshake was firm but not crushing, deliberately professional, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. "I'm Simon," Simon replied, shaking it nonetheless. Dr. Cole's eyes flicked to Zoe, who sat stiffly in the corner of the room, knees drawn together, fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her jacket. "And this must be Zoe," he said softly, almost clinically. He leaned slightly toward her, his posture a blend of authority and concern. "She has emotional episodes, as I'm sure you're aware, and, well, she has been resistant to therapy. She ran from her last session. Understandable, considering her history." Simon's jaw tightened. He had heard that kind of language before. Clinical, detached, the kind professionals used when they wanted to sound objective but were really deflecting responsibility. "Emotional episodes," Simon repeated slowly, watching Cole closely. "And therapy. Ran from it? By ran, do you mean literally or figuratively?" Cole's lips curved in the faintest smile, almost imperceptible. "Figuratively, I assure you. Zoe has a tendency to resist interventions when she feels uncomfortable. She's not used to being challenged on an emotional level." Simon's instincts bristled. There was a smoothness to Cole's words that didn't match the unease in Zoe's eyes. Something was off. Too polished, too practiced. Zoe's voice, quiet and trembling, broke the taut calm. He took Lucy, she said, her gaze darting toward Cole. He took my sister. Simon froze. Every muscle in his body locked into alert. He turned toward her, his voice low but urgent. Who took Lucy? Cole's eyes darkened ever so slightly, a shadow crossing his otherwise composed face. I don't know what you mean, he said smoothly. She's lying, Zoe whispered, shaking her head as if to dismiss herself. He. Simon's gaze snapped between Zoe and Cole. His mind raced. The subtle shift in Cole's demeanor, something almost invisible, yet unmistakable, set his instincts screaming. He had dealt with men like this before. Men who presented the world with a mask of civility while hiding something far darker beneath. Simon leaned forward, lowering his voice. Dr. Cole, I need to understand something. Zoe mentioned something very serious just now. About her sister, Lucy. Can you clarify? Cole's posture shifted imperceptibly, almost imperceptibly stiffening. His calm, professional facade faltered for the briefest instant. Zoe has a very active imagination, he said smoothly. Children and young adults sometimes misinterpret situations. I assure you, nothing has happened to anyone. Simon's gaze narrowed. Nothing has happened? So Zoe is imagining that her sister is missing, or worse. A flicker of irritation crossed Cole's eyes, quickly masked. You misunderstand me. I am responsible for Zoe's therapy, not for her family affairs. My focus is on her mental and emotional well-being. Allegations without evidence. Simon cut him off, voice low, controlled, but edged with a warning. Allegations? She's giving me a name. She's telling me something happened. You're the only adult she's been around besides me. That makes you a person of interest. For the first time, Cole's smile thinned. There was a subtle aggression in his next words, a predatory edge barely concealed beneath the surface. I don't appreciate being interrogated, Mr. Anders. I am a professional. I expect the same courtesy that you would extend to a colleague. Simon didn't flinch. He knew Cole was trying to regain control, to redirect the tension back onto him. Professional or not, Simon said quietly, I have a responsibility to Zoe. If she says something real, then I have a responsibility to investigate it. That's the courtesy we owe her. Cole's jaw tightened slightly, the first real crack in his composed exterior. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, choosing his next words carefully. Zoe has her mother's number, he said finally. She could call her if she wished. Zoe's eyes widened. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, shaking slightly as she handed it to Simon. Call my mother, she whispered urgently. Not him. Please, just her. Simon took the paper, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel Cole's eyes on him, sharp and calculating. But his focus was on the girl, on the urgency in her voice. Her hands trembled slightly, and he could see the fear coiled tightly beneath her surface. Cole's voice softened again, almost unnervingly so. Simon, I urge caution. You don't want to overreact. Zoe's perceptions can be misleading. Simon's glare didn't waver. I don't need your urging, Dr. Cole. I need the truth. And right now, I'm listening to Zoe." The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on Simon's shoulders. Every instinct, every past experience with deceptive men, screamed at him to move carefully. Cole's polite exterior was cracking under pressure, and Simon knew the man's aggression could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. Zoe looked at Simon with pleading eyes, and in that moment, he made a decision. He would call her mother. Not Cole. Not anyone else. Only someone who could actually help her. Cole's lips pressed into a thin line, his hands tightening ever so slightly at his sides. Simon felt the shift in the air, the subtle threat beneath the veneer of civility. He reached for his phone. "I'm calling her now," he said firmly, keeping his voice calm, deliberate. Zoe let out a small, shaky sigh of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the air conditioner. As Simon dialed, his eyes never left Cole. He watched the man like a hawk watching prey, noting every micro-expression, every flicker of irritation, every tightening of the jaw. He knew this was only the beginning. Cole was polite, cultured, professional. But underneath it all, Simon could feel the predator waiting, coiled and ready. The phone rang. Zoe's mother answered after the second tone. Simon kept his voice steady as he spoke, asking questions, gathering information, listening for any sign of distress. Zoe pressed close to him, her small frame trembling, and Simon could feel the fear radiating from her. Cole remained in the corner, silent now, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. He said nothing, did not intervene, yet his presence was oppressive, a constant reminder of the danger lurking behind his polite facade. Simon's instincts were screaming, and he knew this encounter was far from over. Zoe had led him here, and now he had a trail to follow, but he also knew the predator was already aware of every move he made. Every word, every action, every hesitation would be observed, analyzed, exploited. And Simon would have to stay 3 steps ahead to keep Zoe safe. The phone call ended, leaving a tense silence in the room. Zoe's shoulders sagged slightly, relief flickering across her face, but it was fleeting. Simon kept his eyes on Cole, who remained unervingly composed, though the faint twitch at the corner of his jaw betrayed the cracks in his mask. "Dr. Cole," Simon said evenly, placing himself slightly in front of Zoe, "we need to clear something up. Right now." Cole's polite smile never wavered, but his hands tightened at his sides. "Mr. Anders, there's nothing to clear. Zoe is imaginative, and emotions can cloud judgment." Simon's gaze didn't flinch. "We're done pretending, Cole. Zoe has already told me something serious. I need the truth." Zoe, still trembling, took a hesitant step forward. She clutched Simon's sleeve as though anchoring herself. I found something," she whispered, voice shaking. "A silver key, with B12 scratched on it." Simon's head snapped toward her, every instinct on high alert. "Where did you find it?" "In the drawer," she said, pressing the small metal key into his palm. "I was looking for my notebook, and I saw it. I don't know why it was there, but—" her voice dropped to a quiver. "I heard crying. Behind a bolted door. Someone was in trouble." Cole's eyes flickered to the key, then back to Simon. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Simon saw it, the first true crack in the polished veneer. The carefully cultivated calm of Dr. Cole wavered, the shadow beneath his surface creeping forward. "Crying?" Simon asked, voice low, deliberate. "From behind a locked door?" Cole cleared his throat. "Zoe's imagination," he hesitated, then added, "I think you're reading far too much into this." Simon's hands tightened around the key. He crouched slightly to meet Zoe's level, searching her eyes. They mirrored something he hadn't seen in years: fear, terror, and a desperate need for protection. It took him back, 17 years ago, to the last time he saw his own sister before she vanished. Her eyes wide, glistening with the same helpless terror, begging silently for someone to save her. He'd never forgotten that expression. He'd never forgotten the helplessness, the ache of failing someone he loved. "I know what that look means," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "And I won't fail you, Zoe." Cole's calm demeanor finally faltered. He shifted uneasily, a flash of panic slipping past the controlled mask. Simon noticed the micro-expressions, the tightening of his lips, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his breathing had sharpened almost imperceptibly. The predator's facade was cracking under pressure. "You don't understand," Cole said, voice pitched a fraction higher, betraying the subtle aggression simmering beneath his polished exterior. "You have no right to." Simon stepped fully between Zoe and Cole, placing himself as a literal and symbolic barrier. "Enough, Cole. I'm done listening to lies. You try to scare her, I'll make sure it backfires. I promise you that." Zoe clutched Simon's hand tighter, nodding slightly as though finding courage in his presence. "I'm not making it up," she said, her voice steadier now. "I swear, I heard her. Someone crying behind a door that was bolted. And then I found the key." Cole's eyes darted toward the door as if calculating, planning. But the facade was gone. Simon could see the panic rising, the mask of professionalism slipping further with every heartbeat. He knew then that Cole had underestimated the girl, and more dangerously, underestimated Simon's instincts. "Where is she?" Simon asked, keeping his tone calm but sharp. "The person crying?" Cole swallowed, his throat tight. "Zoe, she's imagining things. I assure you there's no one." "No," Simon interrupted, his voice hard. "She's not imagining. I know fear when I see it. And I've seen it before. Her eyes, they match the last look I saw on someone I loved. Someone I failed. And I will not fail her now." The tension in the room spiked. Cole's posture stiffened, the polite mask collapsing into a tight, controlled rage. Simon could sense it radiating from him, an undercurrent of fury hidden beneath a veneer of civility. Every second, Cole's calm threatened to snap, his aggressive instincts sharpening like a predator cornered. Zoe pressed closer to Simon. "Please. You have to help her." I can't do it alone." Simon's jaw clenched. He had the key now, a tangible link to the door behind which fear, and possibly worse, was trapped. He had a path to follow, and he could feel Cole's heartbeat matching his own, rapid and tense, the predator aware that its prey was no longer naive. Cole's voice came out in a controlled but strained calm. "Simon, you're making a mistake. Interfering like this, it could be dangerous." Simon's eyes narrowed. "The only mistake here was thinking you could manipulate a child, and me, without consequences. That ends now. Cole's breath quickened, and for the first time, Simon saw fear reflected in the older man's eyes. Not panic yet, but recognition. The lie was cracking. The story he had spent months carefully constructing, polite words, clinical detachment, subtle intimidation, was unraveling. Simon turned to Zoe. "Stay close. Don't let go. I'm going to find her." She nodded, the key clutched tightly in her hand, as if it were a lifeline to someone still alive. Cole's hand twitched toward the desk, then fell. He was calculating, assessing, but the tension in the room had shifted irrevocably. Simon could see it. Cole knew his lie was exposed, and with it, his control slipping. Simon took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was more than a confrontation. This was a hunt now, one he could not afford to fail. And as he glanced at Zoe, seeing the echo of his own past reflected in her terrified gaze, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. This time, he would save her. It happened so fast that Simon barely had time to react. The polished predator, the man who had spent months cloaking menace in civility, now ran like a cornered animal. He sprinted toward his sleek black SUV parked at the curb, his movements sharp, desperate. Zoe froze behind Simon, clutching the silver key like a talisman. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her small hands trembled as she gripped the bike beside her, seeking any anchor in the chaos. Before Cole could reach the vehicle, Rocco, Muscle and Enforcer all rolled into one, intercepted him. A brutal clothesline sent Cole sprawling to the pavement. The impact rattled the asphalt beneath him. For a heartbeat, the mask was gone. The calm, polished veneer vanished, replaced with raw panic and fury. Cole rolled over, his hands scraping against the concrete as he struggled to rise. His face was contorted, eyes wild with unrestrained fear and rage. "You don't understand. You have no idea who I know. Powerful people. Simon's knee drove into the small of Cole's back, pinning him mercilessly. Every muscle in Simon's body tensed as he held him down, feeling the man struggle, feeling the pulse of desperate energy that could turn violent at any second. "Stay down," Simon said, voice low but commanding. "You're done." Cole thrashed, but Simon's grip didn't falter. The man's cries rang sharp and frantic against the quiet street, a man unmasked for all to see. "I'll destroy you. You think you can touch me? You have no idea who." Zoe peeked from behind the bike, her face pale as the threat of violence cracked the air. She whispered a breathless plea. "Please, don't let him hurt anyone else." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension, growing louder. Simon didn't move. His eyes were on Cole, reading every twitch, every micro-expression, every sign of impending violence. The Mafia boss might have been the predator, but Simon knew this was a man who relied on fear as a shield. Without it, he was vulnerable. Two police cruisers screeched to a halt nearby. Officers jumped out, hands hovering near holsters. They hesitated as they assessed the scene, a man pinned to the pavement by another, the silver key glinting in the sunlight, a terrified young girl clinging behind a bike. "Step back," one officer called. "Hands off." Simon didn't move. He kept his knee pressed firmly into Cole's spine. His voice remained calm, controlled, even as adrenaline coursed through him. "Not until she talks. Not until she tells you what he's done." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Cole screamed again, twisting and writhing, lashing out verbally, trying to paint himself as the victim of excessive force. "Release me! I have connections. You don't know what you're dealing with. You can't touch me." Simon's jaw tightened. He felt the weight of the moment, legally and morally, but he couldn't release him. Not yet. Zoe's terror was real, palpable. She needed to speak, and she needed the world to hear her truth. The girl finally stepped out from behind the bike, voice trembling, barely audible over Cole's shouted threats. She looked directly at the nearest detective, eyes pleading. He hurts kids," she whispered. Time seemed to freeze. The officers froze, uncertainty written across their faces. Simon's knee remained firm, his hands steady, the tension in his body a bridge between control and chaos. Cole's eyes widened as he registered Zoe's words. Panic replaced rage. The bravado, the threats, the polished predator, all evaporated under the weight of that simple, devastating truth. Simon's gaze softened slightly toward Zoe. "See, you did the right thing," he said quietly. "Thank you for telling them." The police officers, now aware of the severity, began moving in, cautiously cuffing Cole while still wary of the Mafia connections he claimed. Simon finally allowed his knee to lift, keeping his presence protective, vigilant, as Zoe stepped closer, clinging to him. Cole was shouting still, flailing against the cuffs, but the mask of civility was gone, replaced by the raw, exposed desperation of a man whose lies had finally cracked open. Simon guided Zoe a few steps away from the scene, keeping her shielded. "You're safe now," he said, voice steady but gentle. "They can't touch you here." She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks, relief mixed with lingering terror. Simon knew this was only the beginning. The Mafia boss might be in cuffs, but the danger had only started to surface. And Simon's memory of his own sister, taken so long ago, burned sharply again. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. Not this time. Not with Zoe. The hum of police radios filled the air as Simon and Zoe stood just beyond the tape, watching officers begin to sweep through Cole's sleek office. His carefully curated world of polished surfaces and organized chaos now felt hollow, the threat lurking beneath exposed for all to see. Zoe pressed close to Simon, her small hand gripping his arm. He grabbed me," she whispered, voice trembling. "Earlier, in the office. I was scared." Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to speak. I almost couldn't get away." Simon's jaw tightened, a surge of rage prickling at his skin. He wanted to go after Cole, to make him pay for every second of fear he had inflicted. But Zoe's frightened eyes anchored him. She came first. Always first. "What happened next?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice calm for her sake. She swallowed hard. "I saw Lucy's bracelet," she said, shaking slightly. "The one Lucy Hale used to wear. The one she never took off. It was in his drawer." Simon froze for a moment, the memory of his own sister's disappearance flooding back. The bracelet, small and silver, dangling in the predator's office like a trophy, it made his blood run cold. Lucy Hale had vanished 3 weeks ago, and now the evidence was in front of them, tangible, undeniable. He uses therapy," Zoe continued, voice gaining strength with each word. "And after-school programs. He He grooms kids, makes them trust him. Then, her voice faltered, trembling, but she pressed on. Then he hurts them. I memorized the key, the one with B12, when he dropped it. Simon's heart pounded. He took the small silver key from her hand, inspecting it carefully. B12. The letters scratched roughly into the metal matched the memory Zoe had etched into her mind. He slipped it into his pocket, mind already turning over the possibilities. The officers moved through the office, rifling through drawers and cabinets, bagging items carefully for evidence. Simon watched, aware that every second counted. The rage simmering inside him burned hotter with each passing moment. He wanted to tear Cole apart, to avenge Lucy and every other child trapped in the Predator's network. But Zoe's frightened gaze reminded him why he couldn't act recklessly. Protection first. Justice second. A detective, older, methodical, eyes sharp and calculating, paused mid-search, studying the wall near Cole's desk. Simon noticed the shift in his posture, the narrowing of his eyes. Something had caught his attention. "What is it?" Simon asked, moving closer. The detective crouched, pressing his fingers along the edge of a section of wall paneling. "There's a false wall here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Looks like it covers something. Could be a storage space, or something else." Simon's pulse quickened. "Could you check it?" The detective nodded, signaling two officers to assist. With practiced movements, they carefully removed the paneling. Behind it, the wall revealed a door, small and unassuming, with a lock that gleamed under the fluorescent light. Simon felt his breath catch. He knelt to inspect it, recognizing the familiar etchings immediately. B12. The same code Zoe had memorized, the same key she had held in her trembling hands. Zoe clutched Simon's arm again. "That's it," she whispered. "That's where I heard her crying." The officers exchanged glances, the tension thick in the room. Simon kept his hand on Zoe's shoulder, grounding her, keeping her steady as he processed the discovery. Rage threatened to overtake him, a wildfire itching to explode, but he forced it back, focusing instead on the girl beside him. She needed calm, clarity, and protection more than vengeance. He took the key from his pocket, feeling the cold metal bite lightly against his palm. Slowly, deliberately, he slid it into the lock. It turned with a soft click, the sound amplified in the suddenly silent room. The door remained closed for a heartbeat longer, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Simon's instincts screamed at him. Behind this door could be the proof, the evidence of horrors Zoe had only hinted at. He felt the memory of his sister's terrified face, of her wide, pleading eyes, mirrored perfectly in Zoe. He couldn't fail. Not this time. "Ready?" he asked quietly, looking down at Zoe. She nodded, voice barely audible. "Yes. Please, let's find her." The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. Simon could hear faint echoes, whimpers, cries, the unmistakable sound of someone trapped. He tightened his grip on Zoe's hand, leading her gently toward the stairs. Officers moved behind him, flashlights cutting through the shadows. Simon's mind raced. The key had unlocked more than a door. It had unlocked a path to justice, to salvation. But he knew this was only the beginning. Cole's reach ran deeper than they had imagined. The Mafia network, the children, the grooming. It was a web of control, and they had only begun to pull at the threads. Zoe shivered beside him, and he lowered his voice, soft and steady. "We're going to get her out. Stay close to me. You're safe. I promise." The basement awaited them, dark, silent, and full of answers. And Simon knew, with every ounce of his being, that once they stepped inside, there would be no turning back. The basement was colder than Simon expected, the air thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of something long hidden. Flashlights cut narrow paths through the darkness as he led Zoe down the narrow staircase. Every creak of the old wood beneath their feet set his instincts on edge. Zoe's grip on his hand tightened, small and trembling, but determined. I hear her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Simon's heart clenched. "We're almost there," he said, voice low and steady. "Just a little further." The basement opened into a larger space, dimly lit by a single, bare bulb swinging slightly overhead. And then Simon saw her. Lucy Hale was slumped against the far wall, hair matted, skin pale, and lips cracked from dehydration. Her eyes opened slowly, hazy at first, and then recognition dawned. Relief, terror, and exhaustion collided in a silent scream. "Lucy!" Zoe gasped, releasing Simon's hand and rushing forward. Simon noticed and allowed himself a brief, private smile. He knelt beside her, adjusting the scarf around her shoulders. "See, you're safe now," he said softly. "We're getting everyone out, one step at a time." The tension, however, was far from over. News came through the police radios that Cole, in custody, had already contacted someone, or something, far higher up. A boss, Simon realized, who would not tolerate interference. Men loyal to Cole's network were en route, intent on silencing him, no matter the cost. Simon's jaw tightened. Rage and frustration gnawed at him, but he forced himself to remain grounded for Zoe. The girl needed stability, not another wave of chaos. He could not let Cole's threats jeopardize the fragile trust they had built. An officer approached, speaking low to Simon. "We need to keep moving on the other leads. Cole's associates might try something, but we have to get the remaining children out before they can interfere." Simon nodded. "Do it. But stay alert. He's dangerous even behind bars." Zoe looked up at him, her wide eyes catching the morning light. "Are you going to leave me too?" she asked quietly, voice trembling, barely audible over the commotion. Simon froze for a heartbeat, struck by the vulnerability in her question. He drew her close, holding her shoulder and looking directly into her eyes. "No, never," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever. You're not alone anymore, Zoe." The words seemed to steady her, and she leaned against him for a moment, drawing a fragile comfort from the promise. Simon could feel the shift. Her fear had not vanished, but it had begun to ebb, replaced by the first real sense of safety she had known in weeks. Outside, the Mafia and police were engaged in a tense standoff. Cole's men were circling, their presence aggressive and calculated. The police, aware of the stakes, maintained order but understood that any rash move could escalate into chaos. A temporary truce held, fragile, uneasy, but enough to allow the remaining operations to continue. Simon's mind never left Zoe. He guided her to a quieter spot, keeping her shielded from the tension around them. "We have a lot to do," he said quietly. But we're going to do it together. I won't let anything happen to you." She nodded again, small but resolute. The tiny smiles she allowed themselves to break through now and then were proof that hope, even in the darkest moments, could survive. Simon took a deep breath, scanning the crowd, the chaos, the files, and the terrified but determined faces of the children they had already recovered. He knew the battle was far from over. Cole's influence was strong, his boss a looming threat, and the Mafia network still had tendrils reaching out in unexpected places. But for the first time in weeks, Simon allowed himself to feel something besides rage, purpose. He had Zoe. He had Lucy. He had the evidence to dismantle the network and the courage to see it through. And he would not fail. Not this time. Not for them. The precinct convoy moved slowly through the city streets, sirens cutting through the early evening haze. Simon rode at the front, eyes scanning every alley, every corner. He felt the tension coiling around him like a live wire. They were transporting Cole and the key accomplices to a secure facility, but he knew the Mafia, and Cole's boss, would not let this happen without a fight. It came faster than expected. Rival traffickers, tipped off and emboldened, attacked from both sides. Tires screeched, shots rang out, and chaos erupted around the convoy. Officers scrambled, vehicles skidding, sirens wailing over the gunfire and shouting. Simon's crew, having anticipated the possibility, emerged from the shadows. Skilled operatives moved with precision, intercepting attackers before they could reach the convoy. Simon stayed calm, directing movements with clipped commands, his every decision measured despite the pandemonium. Amid the chaos, Cole spotted an opening. With a surge of desperation, he tried to bolt from the convoy, pushing past officers in a blind frenzy. Simon's instincts kicked in. He pursued, weaving through overturned cars and smoke, heart hammering. The alley appeared suddenly, a narrow corridor flanked by brick walls, littered with discarded crates and broken glass. Cole skidded to a halt at the far end, chest heaving, eyes wide with pure panic. "You're not getting away," Simon said, voice low but resolute, closing the distance. Cole laughed, a frantic, hollow sound. "You don't understand. You have no idea how big this is. It's bigger than the city. Bigger than you. If you let me go, I can tell you." Simon stopped him mid-sentence with a sharp gesture. His eyes burned with controlled fury. "You don't get to hurt children and walk away." Cole's expression flickered. Fear, disbelief, desperation. "Please, just let me go. I can help you. I can tell you everything. I can." Simon shook his head. "No. You made your choice." Cole stumbled back, realizing the futility of escape. Simon's gaze held him in place, unwavering, a wall of justice Simon refused to compromise. The chaos around them continued, the convoy still under attack, the air thick with tension, but Simon didn't waver. He kept Cole pinned in the alley, breathing hard, fists clenched, but controlled. The man before him had been a predator, hiding behind polite words and professional facades, but now stripped bare, he was powerless. Cole's shoulders slumped, and his voice dropped to a weak, pleading murmur. I just wanted. I didn't mean." Simon's eyes hardened. "You didn't just want. You acted. And every child you harmed, every life you tried to destroy, that's on you." Cole's hands twitched, useless against the weight of Simon's presence. He tried to speak again, but no words could undo the damage he had caused. As the sirens and shouting continued, the first news reports began to break nationwide. Screens lit up in homes, offices, and social media feeds. Mafia child trafficking network exposed, 18 children rescued from traffickers, multiple predators arrested. Simon allowed himself a brief, controlled glance at Zoe, who was safe inside the convoy under the protection of his team. She had started to smile again, tentative but real, seeing the first real outcome of her courage and their fight. The network was collapsing. Cole's influence, once sprawling and terrifying, was being dismantled piece by piece. Rival traffickers were detained, evidence was secured, and the scope of the operation, once hidden behind layers of manipulation, was now fully exposed to the public and law enforcement. Simon stayed in the alley, breathing slowly, watching Cole's defeat with a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. He had protected the children. He had saved Zoe. And he had ensured that the predator would not walk free again. Cole's eyes met his, searching, pleading, but Simon's resolve was absolute. The reckoning was complete. The morning sun filtered softly through the hospital window as Zoe sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. Tears streamed down both their faces, but this time they were tears of relief, of safety, of a reunion long overdue. Her mother's embrace was warm, steady, and filled with a quiet, grounding love that Zoe hadn't felt in weeks. "I thought I'd lost you," her mother whispered, voice trembling. "But you're here. You're safe." Zoe nodded, resting her head against her mother's shoulder. "I'm here now," she said softly. "And I'm going to be okay." Life slowly returned to rhythm. Zoe began attending real therapy sessions, this time with a safe, trusted professional. The difference was night and day. No fear, no manipulation, only understanding and guidance. She learned to put words to her fear, to untangle the memories of pain, and to reclaim the courage that had been stolen from her. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled into the yard, Zoe bounded out to the small fenced garden, a new puppy scampering at her heels. Dark, soft, and energetic, she named him Shadow. He became her constant companion, a small reminder that she could feel joy again, even after so much darkness. Zoe's bravery did not go unnoticed. At a school assembly, she stood before her peers, holding a small plaque, a courage award. Applause washed over her, unfamiliar and humbling, but she felt it deeply. She had faced fear, helped save others, and now she was being recognized, not just for surviving, but for acting when it mattered most. That evening, she sat at her small desk in her room, pen in hand, writing a letter. Carefully, deliberately, she formed each word with a seriousness that belied her years. "Dear Simon, thank you for not leaving me. Thank you for saving Lucy, for protecting me, and for teaching me that bravery isn't about being unafraid. It's about standing up when it matters. I want to be strong like you someday." She folded the letter neatly, her eyes lingering on the words. Shadow pawed gently at her feet, and she smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. Simon, later that evening, sat quietly in his apartment. He reached into the vest he had worn during the raid and placed Zoe's letter against his chest. The paper was soft, slightly wrinkled from her careful handling, but its weight grounded him. He read it once more, then folded it gently and slipped it into the inner pocket. He rose and moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline, the buildings glowing in the fading light, the streets quiet after days of chaos. He let the quiet sink in, feeling the ebb of tension, the release of years of pent-up rage and guilt. For the first time in decades, Simon felt a wound inside him begin to close. The wound he had carried since losing his sister, a hollow ache that had shaped him, hardened him, and guided his every move, was healing. And it was Zoe who had unknowingly done it, by trusting, by surviving, and by allowing herself to be brave. He breathed deeply, taking one last look at the city he had vowed to protect. The skyline wasn't just buildings and lights. It was hope, resilience, and the knowledge that even in darkness, courage could prevail. Simon straightened, running a hand over his vest, feeling the letter's reassuring weight. Zoe had faced fear and found strength. And in helping her, he had found the courage to heal a part of himself that had been buried for far too long. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the battles fought and won, of darkness exposed and justice delivered. And inside, a young girl and a man who had once been haunted by loss shared a quiet victory. Survival, growth, and the beginning of a new, brighter chapter.